Hello, my name is Andrew Fort, and welcome to our first orchestration study, our introduction to Ravel's masterpiece in miniature, Mère. This piece was initially born as a piano suite for four hands, which means that two people would play it on one piano. He wrote the suite as a gift to his friend Cyprien Godemsky's children, Mimi and Jean, who were 6 and 7 at the time. Appropriately, Ravel decided to adapt a number of fairy tales from French writers, including Charles Perrault, Madame d'Aulnoy, and Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont, for the two small children, and he set them to music. Rather than leaving the suite for piano, he orchestrated it in 1910 to 1911, and had transformed the suite into a ballet, creating a libretto and adding 2 new movements and 4 connecting interludes by 1912. We'll be following the orchestrated version of the suite for our introduction to the orchestra, because it's a direct adaptation of the piano score, which is advantageous for new score readers. But before we can take a look at the orchestration itself, we have to look at the instrumentation. First we have en grande flûte, which is a flute in C. Nothing to worry about there. Next you'll notice that our second flutist will be doubling on petite flûte, which is a piccolo. Pretty standard. Grande flûte means big flute, and petite flûte means little flute, as you can probably guess. Next we have en hautbois, which is an oboe. Lovely. Next you'll notice that the second oboist will be doubling on cor anglais, which is English horn, which is a type of alto oboe written in F. We have 2 clarinets, and the keys aren't specified here, but if you look at the movements and the key signatures and the markings, you'll notice that 4 movements use the B-flat model, while 1 movement, the third movement, uses the A model. There are differences, but we'll leave that for another time. Next we have a bassoon, and after that we'll notice that the second bassoonist will be playing contrabassoon, which is a type of super low bassoon. There's no other way to say it, it's just really low. Next we have 2 cordes en fa, which means 2 horns in F. Next we have 2 timbales, or timpani, which is pretty different from the standard orchestra, which would normally have 4. Next we have a triangle, we have cymbals, a grosse caisse, which is a bass drum, and a tam-tam, which is a type of tuned gong. Next section we have the xylophone, we have a jeu de timbre, which is a type of keyboard glockenspiel. It's operated by a keyboard, of course, but it has the sharpness of a glockenspiel without the difficulty of getting chords. But it's different from our next instrument, which is a celesta or celesta, which is operated by felt hammers like a piano rather than mallet. Next we have a harp, and we have a quintette à cordes, which is a string quintet, of course. And if you look at the markings on the bottom of the page, you'll see that the basses are required to have 5 strings, at least some of them, which means that there will be some notes lower than our standard E string on a bass. But fortunately our 5-string basses, or bass extensions that go down to a B or C, are very, very common now. Lovely. Let's move on to the next section, our transpositions. So next up, we're going to go over the transpositions of the orchestra, which is admittedly one of the most confusing parts about reading a score. And as a note before I go into the transpositions themselves, we should first ask, why do we do this? I used to get pretty upset about it myself because of how annoying it is to try to keep track of all the different ways a written note might sound. But over time I realized that transpositions can actually make life significantly easier for these instrumentalists, which is more important than the score reader. Because they can transfer over fingerings to be able to play instruments that are pitched very differently, it means they only have to make minor adjustments. So a clarinetist can just as easily play a clarinet in B flat as a clarinet in A, and with bigger adjustments can play a high E flat clarinet or a very low B flat bass clarinet, or anything in between, or lower or higher, because there are those. And actually, in a more roundabout way, the written transpositions do make the orchestrator's lives easier too. Different registers of an instrument can have significantly different tone colors to them, and those tone colors and registers are associated with different areas of the staff. So, having instruments that transpose means that the score reader and orchestrator can tell whether, let's say, a C oboe and an F English horn, which is an alto oboe, are playing in their warm, projecting, wild low registers, or their beautifully thin high registers, or in their golden middle tones, just by looking at the staff. If we didn't transpose the English horn and a number of other instruments, we'd actually lose that immediate sight recognition of tone color that instrument families share. And the prototypical members of the flute family, the clarinet family, and the bassoon family, like the oboes, all share that same register qualities with their transposing cousins. So we're going to go from the top to the bottom of the staff. First up, we have the flutes, which play in C. It makes my life easy. The piccolo also plays in C, but an octave up. This means that a written C5 on the treble clef will actually come out as a C6 sounding above the treble clef. The celesta and the xylophone also use this transposition. Here on this page, we have the piccolo and the celesta, which both transpose up the octave. You can see pretty clearly why we transpose them when I turn on concert pitch. Now, let's listen. Next, we have the oboe, which plays in C, pretty standard. But the oboe's older brother, the English horn, also called the cor anglais and the alto oboe, is an F major, which means it's a real pitch transposition. So, if the English horn is an F, that means its standard scale is an F major. The C major written scale for English horn comes out as a concert F major scale, a fifth down from what is written on the page. Which sort of makes sense, so C is F, D is G, E is A, and so on. And that's why for English horn, for any key signature, we will either take away one flat or add one sharp. And funny enough, all the standard instruments that are called horn, the French horn, the English horn, and the basset horn, all transpose an F. Of these, the only actual horn is the French horn. The English horn, as said before, is an alto oboe, while the basset horn is an alto clarinet. For some reason, we insist on calling instruments things they certainly aren't. But it does make remembering those transpositions just a little bit easier. And here on this page, we have an English horn line and a French horn line from different parts of the piece. Let's listen. Next, we're going to look at the clarinets. There's a lot of different clarinet types. Believe me, just Google them. But the two we'll be looking at today are the clarinet in B flat and the clarinet in A. They only differ by a semitone, but this semitone can make all the difference when looking at a score. The B flat clarinet is written a whole step, or major second, higher than it sounds. So a written C4 will come out as a B flat 3, just below. This means, for any key signature in concert pitch, we will subtract 2 flats or add 2 sharps, or subtract a flat and add a sharp. This key center means that the B flat clarinet is especially suitable for flat keys. For example, a concert C major scale will be a written D major scale, but a key signature with a lot of flats, like let's say G flat major, will only look like A flat major for a clarinet, which is significantly less daunting. Other instruments that use this transposition are the trumpet, the cornet, and the soprano saxophone. And instruments that use this transposition an octave lower include the tenor saxophone and bass clarinet. In the piccolo trumpet, we'll use this transposition, but an octave higher. Now, the A clarinet is written a minor third higher than sounding, so written C4 will come out as an A3. This means that for any key signature, we will add 3 flats or take away 3 sharps. So a sounding C major scale will be a written E flat major scale in the A clarinet. This key center means that the A clarinet plays in sharp keys way more readily than the B flat, although some players prefer to transpose on the spot unless the excerpt uses the lowest semitone of the A clarinet, which is the concert C3, which this piece does. One of those things about sharp keys is that most wind players don't like sharp keys nearly as much as they like flat keys because they're used to playing in bands when they're younger, that is. Because of the A clarinet's transposition, it makes those sharp keys a lot easier. So like an F sharp major scale will actually only look like an A major scale for the A clarinet. Super helpful in my opinion. Now, the only other major instrument that uses this transposition in A is the rare oboe d'amore, which I don't see a lot of, but when I do see it, it's almost always a featured instrument. There's also a flute d'amore, but it's so seldom used that I've never actually seen it in a score. So, let's look at some excerpts in B flat and A clarinets from Mère. Next up, we've got the bassoons. Unlike the other wind instruments, they're written in bass clef. The standard bassoon is in C, so no worries about transposing so long as you can read bass clef. However, the contrabassoon, also known as the double bassoon, is written a full octave higher than it sounds, so it's still in C, but it's really low. The prefix contra basically means extra low, as I said. So the contrabassoon is really low, like look at it in concert pitch. In fact, this means it's the lowest standard member of the orchestra, even lower than the basses. Let's look at the beginning of the famous contrabassoon excerpt from the 4th movement. Next are the French horns. I think you'll remember from before that they are written in F because all things called horns are in F. This written C sharp is actually an F sharp, right? We've already listened to the horn earlier, so we're going to move onward. We've got the timpani, which are in bass clef. Not too bad. The triangle, cymbals, bass drum, and tam-tam are unpitched, so we don't need to worry about their transpositions. We only need to think about their rhythm and general timbre. The xylophone and celesta are, as noted earlier, both in C, but are written an octave lower than they sound. So, like the piccolo, they're really high. Now, the jeu de timbre, or keyboard glockenspiel, is written 2 octaves lower than sounding, but is often replaced by a regular glockenspiel, which has the same transposition. But this transposition means that the keyboard glockenspiel is really high. The harp, violins, violas, and cello are all in concert pitch, thank God. But the contrabass is an oddity a little bit. Like the contra bassoon, it is written an octave higher than it sounds. Remember what the prefix contra means? So it's low. And it has a beautiful presence too. The contrabass doesn't get a solo in Mère, but let's take a look at a lovely pizzicato accompaniment line from the beginning of the first movement, shall we? Alright, we've covered all the transpositions in this piece, which is quite a bit, so let's recap. The flute, oboe, bassoon, harp, violins, violas, and cello are all in C major, concert pitch. They are what they tell you. The keyboard glockenspiel, or jeu de timbre, sounds 2 octaves higher than written, which is really, really high, while the piccolo, xylophone, and celesta sound only 1 octave higher, which is really high. The English horn and French horn, like all things named horn, are in F, so they sound exactly a 5th lower than written. The clarinets will be in either B flat, sounding a whole step lower than written, or in A, sounding a minor 3rd lower than written. The marking at the beginning of the movement will always tell you which one is called for. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to the analysis of Ravel's masterpiece Ma Mère, which is admittedly my favorite piece of all time, especially the last movement. I have a very strong emotional connection to this piece, and I'm glad to be able to share this with you. Orchestration is one of my greatest passions, and the fact that I get to teach people about it makes my heart happy in ways that I can't really explain in regular terms or in any terms. So yeah, drink some hot tea, go to sleep soon, and have a lovely day. Goodbye.